Hey, good morning, good morning, good morning. Oh, wait a minute. So what I'm going to do while we are deliberating is go back to the first trial, the federal, and recap that.
Laid out a pretty compelling case that Officer Bean was not compliant with a lot of this, even though he did fall under the obstruction of justice guilty verdict. John Keith Perry, talking on behalf of Tadarius Bean, the testimony of the former Scorpion Unit officer, most referred to him as quiet, and that Bean was the newest member of the team.
Okay.
They
We
are
are now
currently still
learning
deliberating.
the other former
on the
Memphis
state
police
trial.
officer, Demetrius Haley, has been found guilty on count 3 and 4. Count 3 is conspiracy to witness tamper. Count 4 is obstruction of justice. Again, Demetrius Haley found guilty on 2 counts.
This
3 and 4
is the
conspiracy
federal
to witness
from
tamper
last
and
6 months
obstruction
ago.
of justice, which means that he was found not guilty at this point on excessive force and failure to intervene and deliberate indifference. So at this point, we are still waiting on the third suspect, which at this point is Justin Smith.
Justin Smith. So again, to repeat, guilty on obstruction of justice, guilty on
These are on the federal
conspiracy
charges.
to obstruct justice. Of course, that conspiracy charge kind of creates a larger umbrella. That means that the officers conspired with each other in this case to talk about the case on the scene, and a lot of that played out on body cam video. You saw that. You saw those officers talking to each other and seeming, look, we're not litigating this case here on the air, but they seem to begin constructing their own narrative as opposed to exactly what was played out there on the videotape. That body
This
cam
is for the
and the
federal
tower cam
trial
of the beating
that
of
they
Tyre
had
Nichols.
about
Of course, that beating
6
happened back
months
on
ago.
January 7th. It was a Saturday night in 2023.
We're also learning that Demetrius Haley, again, we said he was guilty on the 2 counts, conspiracy to witness tamper and obstruction of justice, which was count 4. But we're learning that he was found guilty of 2 lesser charges, deprivation of rights and bodily injury. Again, we're still waiting on anything that's coming down for Justin
I'm
Smith.
expecting
He
for
is
him
the
to get the
other suspect involved in this
And
right
we
now.
just got
The
word
buck
just a
of
second
the
ago.
charges.
Justin Smith, guilty only of count 4, obstruction of justice.
See,
meaning
he got the
civil rights
least even in
violations,
the federal,
unreasonable,
so I'm expecting for
unreasonable
him to get
force
the
use
least
and
this
deliberate
go around
indifference,
as well.
not guilty on that charge, as well as not guilty on conspiracy charges. So Justin Smith, former officer Justin Smith, found guilty only on count 4, the obstruction of justice charge.
Again, this whole thing started with 5 former Memphis police officers, Emmett Martin, Desmond Mills, Justin Smith, Tadarius Bean, and Demetrius Haley. We know that Emmett Martin and Desmond Mills, they pleaded guilty early on this year, in fact.
They did, and they actually were quite detrimental to the defense in this case because they in turn testified on behalf of the prosecution against Bean, Haley, and Smith. Of course, this is wrapping up almost 4 full weeks in the courtroom for those jurors.
This was for federal.
Of course, for Judge Mark Norris, who's presided over this, and the attorneys, 3 sets of defense attorneys, and of course the prosecution on behalf of the Department of Justice. Interesting to say the least, these verdicts that are coming down. I dare say this is not exactly what we expected.
It's definitely not what we expected based on the video that MPD released. I believe that was at the end of January where they actually released the video.
It was very shortly after the beating.
Right. Based on the video, many people felt that the actions of the officers were very excessive. But clearly what happened in court today, the jury determined something different.
Well, again, we saw this. You've seen this play out time and time again. It's been available online, and of course, we brought it to you first here, Fox 13, when it was first released. You've seen it. You've been able to pass your own judgment. Part of this goes out to the fact that they brought in force or use of force experts, and many of those, many of the parts of the testimony by that use of force expert pointed to the fact that they did seem to be compliant in some ways
With policy.
with policy, and that's where, you know, if you go back shortly after the Tyre Nichols beating and after his death, there were many calls for a complete investigation. Matter of fact, there has been a complete investigation into the Memphis Police Department, the Scorpion Unit, that all 5 members of that particular team were members of the Scorpion Unit. That has since been disbanded. That's now no longer part of the arsenal, if you will, of the MPD. So a lot has happened since January 7th of 2023, but again, so far, only obstruction of justice and conspiracy to obstruct justice charges against these individuals. Of course, we don't know the sentencing yet. That's yet to happen. That's going to be handed down by Judge Mark Norris, I believe.
That we're waiting at this point.
There we go. Here are the maximum penalties. That's what we were going to go to there. For the unreasonable force, the deliberate indifference, life in prison was possible. Now, again, just because the life in prison sentences are off the table here, that does not mean that these officers are not facing significant prison time. Because as you see on the screen, the conspiracy to obstruct justice carries a maximum of 20 years. The obstruction charge itself also carries a maximum of 20 years. It'll be interesting on the 2 that were found on Bean and Haley. Both of those were found guilty on both of those bottom counts. If those particular sentences will be run concurrent, or if they will be separate sentences. If so, that could be up to 40 years for each officer as a maximum.
Mind you, this is the state case. This is the federal case. They're still facing state charges as well, which I believe is second-degree murder for that.
Right.
So there's still some other charges that they're facing that's coming down the pipeline here.
Yeah, that state trial is set to begin sometime early next year. They wanted to wait until this federal trial wrapped up and give the defense attorneys and, of course, the prosecution on behalf of Shelby County time to vet all of the outcome of this, get this tidied away, and then move into that state court. Right after that, you'll see the 3rd civil trial, and that 3rd civil trial will not begin until sometime. They're predicting sometime early next year. That will be after the state trial as well. That's where the family of Tyre Nichols is seeking $550 million in damages against not only the city of Memphis, but also other individuals named in that case, including the 5 officers.
Again, we're talking about 3 officers tonight: Justin Smith, Tadarius Bean, and Demetrius Haley. We know that Emmett Martin and Desmond Mills, they've already pled guilty.
This is
but these are
recapping the
other 3
federal
officers that are
case
tied to
about
the
6,
Tyre
7
Nichols
months ago.
beating.
Hey, Vicky.
Just for
While
clarification,
we're waiting
tonight,
on
Tadarius Bean, guilty on count
federal.
4, which was obstruction of justice. Demetrius Haley, guilty on counts 3 and 4, which is still obstruction of justice, but witness tampering was tied in that as well. Haley was also
Witness
found guilty of
tampering.
2
That's the
lesser
part I
charges,
wanted us to
including,
hear. He got witness tampering.
deprivation of rights and bodily
Haley.
injury. The last suspect was Justin Smith, found guilty on count
Told y'all
4,
something
again,
about him. I
obstruction of
think he
justice, and
tied
we
to the
noted
mob.
that could be up to 20 years
Witness
in prison for
tampering.
that.
20 years for both of those counts, in fact. Civil rights violations, the unreasonable force violations, the deliberate indifference charges, found not guilty. All 3 officers found not guilty on all of those charges. So again, life in prison regarding the federal case, off the table for all 3. It's going to be a minute. I'm not exactly sure the timetable. We've got
Witness
reporters in the
tampering.
newsroom, or not in the newsroom, but in the courtroom, I should say, that should be able
On
to
the
give us a little
federal,
more
though.
information on exactly how long it's
I
going
wish
to
they'd
take
have brought
before we
that
see
up in the
sentencing in this
state.
particular trial.
Mind you, all of this started on January 7th of 2023. It started that evening. In fact, where Tyre Nichols was pulled over, I believe it was in Hickory Hill.
It was.
And everything in
Rains and Ross Road.
Yes, and he was only a block or 2 away from his home. when all
And
this
only a
happened.
block or two from the Rains MPD station.
Precinct.
All right, let's go to Fox 13's Kayla Solomon. She has been covering this case since day one. Again, we're wrapping up
So
almost
he was
4
guilty,
full
found
weeks
guilty
in a
of
federal
witness
courtroom.
tampering on
Kayla,
the federal
what can you tell
charges.
us?
Well, I'll tell you
I
one
wonder
thing,
what
that
that
this
means.
verdict came down much sooner than we were all expecting. It took about 6 hours for the jury to reach the verdict. And I know Darcy and Daryl, you guys have been saying what those charges are, but all 3 defendants were found guilty of the conspiracy obstruction of justice charge, that count 4, and not guilty of the other charges instead. Now, we do know that one defendant, Demetrius Haley, was found guilty of both obstruction charges and the lesser charges when it comes to the unreasonable force. So at this point, what we're waiting for is to see exactly how the family is going to react, how the defense attorneys are going to react, and the prosecutors in this case. It has been a very long trial, almost exactly 4 weeks. It took 19 days to get to the point that we are at now. So at this point, we're waiting any moment for the family to come down, for those defense attorneys and prosecutors to come down. We do know that while the verdict was being read, the family was stoic in the courtroom. They did not have a reaction. They kept a straight face throughout this entire thing. And they've done the same throughout the entire trial, just as someone making observations within the courtroom. But again, these 3 defendants are guilty of the obstruction of justice charge, not guilty as charged for unreasonable force, but Demetrius Haley is guilty of lesser charges of causing bodily injury. So again, at this point, just waiting for the family and everyone else to come outside.
Kayla, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but I would think that the prosecution has to be a little taken aback by this, given the case they laid out, plus the video that we've seen so many times, time and time again. But also, we can't get lost in the fact that these 2 charges, the obstruction of justice and the conspiracy to obstruct justice, those still carry significant prison
about 6
time.
months
So
ago.
we're not, these officers are not getting off free.
Yeah, that's right. It's up to 20 years for each of those charges. But while the verdict was being read, you could see the look of surprise on the prosecutor's face, probably a little bit of disappointment as well. We did see one prosecutor, his face turned red while the verdict was being read by the judge. And he went through juror by juror and polled them to make sure that this was, in fact, a unanimous decision. And all of their answers were yes.
Kayla, curious. We have seen the video on the extent of, we've also seen all of the pictures of Tyre Nichols.
Again, this is for the federal, about 7 months, 6 or 7 months ago.
Very clear that these officers felt as if Tyre Nichols was a dangerous suspect, as if he was trying to get away, as if he was being combative. Did any of that play with the jury? Did you see anything on their faces that would make them think, well, maybe?
I know it was difficult at some point for jurors to watch the videos. We did see, just from where we were sitting, that one of the jurors ended up covering his ears, especially in parts of the video where you could hear Tyre calling for his mother on that body camera video. So you could see some of them did have reactions to the videos, but again, at this point, it looks like it didn't affect their decision much.
Okay, that is Fox 13's Kayla Solomon. She has been there again from the beginning of this court case.
This is
All
just
of this started,
recapping
of
how
course,
it went with the
January
federal.
7th of last year. Kayla has been on this case since the first, since it first started. She's been in the courtroom, in fact, for the last 19 days on this case.
Kayla, do you expect the Nichols family to come out? Do you know if they're going to talk to the media? Have they made themselves available today, or do you know?
Yeah, I know this morning they did do a prayer circle, but they didn't indicate whether or not they were planning to speak after a verdict. So at this point, like I said, we're just waiting for them to come down and see if we can get them to comment at all on this case. I know their attorney, Ben Crump, we have not seen him today. We also haven't seen Antonio Romanucci, so their team of attorneys is not here, but we do know the family is here and they were in the courtroom.
Very good. Again, Kayla, stand by. We'll be joining you again in a moment. Here we are, 10 minutes, almost 11 minutes after 5 o'clock. Keep in mind, the jury was handed this case, as Kayla pointed out, just before 11 a.m. It took them almost a couple of hours this morning for Judge Mark Norris to read instructions to the jury, because there's a long procedural process in reading those instructions. It's not just go deliberate. So that happened. They were able to get the case, went back into the room, deliberated from 11 until about 4:15. That's when we found out that they had a verdict in this case. And typically, as Darcy and I were discussing, we were discussing in the newsroom earlier, typically
Please hit
more
the like
quickly you get a
button.
verdict read,
You think that it's going to be?
the worse it is for the defendants. But here we are 5 hours in, and to reset the charges, to reset the verdict, I should say, in the death of Tyre Nichols. Again, this is the federal trial. This is not the murder trial. This is in the violation of civil rights and the obstruction of justice trial, if you will, to Darius Bean, former officer. Deliberate indifference, not guilty. Conspiracy to obstruct, not guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. That carries a 20-year term.
We also have Demetrius Haley.
Listen,
Unreasonable force, guilty. Deprivation of rights, guilty. Conspiracy to obstruct, guilty. And obstruction of justice, guilty.
he got the
The
most.
obstruction of, rather, the conspiracy to obstruct and
The
obstruction
one I
of
say
justice.
worked
Those are the two
for,
charges that are 20
CMG.
years, that he could face 20 years in prison. The lesser charges, unreasonable force and deprivation of rights, again, both found guilty on those.
And of course, there were some reduced
And
charges
he-
as well for Justin Smith.
Also have
As we roll to his graphic,
prior
unreasonable force,
prison
not guilty. Deliberate indifference, also not guilty. Conspiracy
abuse.
to obstruct, not guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. And what were the other charges, Darcy?
The two charges for Demetrius Haley, the lesser charges, deprivation of rights,
That was Haley.
but also causing bodily harm.
Gotcha,
He's found
gotcha.
guilty on those two charges, the lesser charges as well.
So that's where we stand. You just heard Fox 13's Kayla Solomon, who's been in the courtroom since the very beginning.
the one that said
Since they
got
began
out and
selecting
said
a
beat
jury,
him.
described the faces of the defense attorneys, the prosecution, the federal
Just to
prosecutors.
remind us what
One seemed
happened in the
angry, the
federal.
other shocked.
While
And
we're
I
waiting
think
on the
that,
verdict.
I
in the
think that there are a
state.
lot of people who are going to be shocked at the way this played out. But after 4 weeks, here we are.
We were also wondering when they're going to be sentenced. That's one of the things people have been talking about. We're going to toss it back to Fox 13's Kayla Solomon, who joins us. She has been at federal court for the last 19 days. She has been in front of this case, and she brings
Yeah,
us
it's
more.
306
Kayla, we're
people
trying to
in
find out,
here.
do you
Please hit the
finally
like
have a sentencing
button
date?
and support the platform.
Does this look like your internet provider? Surprise fees, one-time charges, and sudden
These
price
are
hikes hidden in the fine print.
When they went to federal court.
Yes, we do know the sentencing date was set for January of next year. So we know in that time that they will be out just waiting to be sentenced. And that state case is still slated to happen in February. And of course, that state case has to do with a second-degree murder charge. So at this point, we know the sentencing will happen just a few weeks before that state case is set to start.
So that could be at some point in February, if not some point in January, where the state case, where the sentencing will happen for these federal charges.
And that's
Kayla,
what
if you
we're
would,
waiting on the
again, given the
verdict
fact
for.
that you have been there since day one, you've covered this story since day one, January 7, 2023. And I know it's all still very fresh on your mind. I would like to just get your general impressions of, more specifically, this past week, closing arguments that led us up to this point today. What were your impressions? What were you left with as the jury began their deliberations?
I'll tell you what, we were watching the jurors' faces as closing arguments were happening just to see if anybody had any strong reactions or any reaction at all. And they were difficult to read. They did not give a reaction to any of the defense attorneys' arguments, nor did they give any reaction to what prosecutors had to say. But we did hear, of course, each defense attorney had the opportunity to plead their final case to the jury for this. And the jury, like I said, they've also been straight-faced, but they were instructed to be pretty stoic the entire case. They didn't want to see any reaction. The judge instructed them that any strong reactions could be a problem. And he said the same thing to everyone in the gallery as far as the family members go, as far as community activists who also showed up to attend the trial. Everyone across the board, difficult to read throughout this entire court case. And we finally see today it led all up to this verdict.
I know that the three defendants, none of them have spoken to the media at all. We're talking about Justin Smith, Darius Bean, and of course Demetrius Haley. But I'm curious if they had a reaction, especially to the count 4 of obstruction of justice, knowing that that's possibly 20 years behind bars. Did they react at all? Because we also know, Kayla, that I believe that Desmond Mills broke down on the stand. So how did these other three defendants react?
So, okay.
Yeah, at this point, you couldn't see much of a reaction
So
from
he
them
broke
either. It's
down
probably likely
even
they
on
were
the federal,
also told not to give much
is
of a
probably
reaction
why
by
he
each of
pled
their
guilty
attorneys.
to the
But
state.
you could see attorneys were feeling a little relieved as the verdict was read. And of course, in this case where you have the charge of unreasonable force and then the lesser charge of bodily injury, you know, we did see what happened in that case, especially with defendant Haley. At this point, we want to see what defendant Haley's attorney has to say specifically, because he was found guilty of those two lesser charges of causing bodily harm, as well as the 2 obstruction of justice charges. So right now it looks like he's going to be facing the most prison time in this case.
And one of the interesting facets of this case, too, Kayla, are the two defendants that pled guilty.
This
Those
is
two
for
other
the
officers,
federal.
Emmett Martin, Desmond Mills. I mean, there's already been recommendations laid out that Martin should face 40 years in prison, Mills 15 years through the guilty plea. How do you think that's going to play out? I mean, they've yet to be sentenced. I'm assuming that they will be sentenced with this group of three. Is that correct?
No, so each of them actually has a different sentencing date. So Mills pleaded guilty first. He pleaded guilty just 2 months after these federal charges came down, and he pleaded guilty to two of the charges, one for unreasonable force for using his baton and the other for the obstruction of justice and conspiracy. And the recommended time for him was about 15 years. And Emmett Martin pleaded guilty just weeks before this trial began, also to two of the charges as charged. And his recommendation set by the prosecution was about a 40-year prison sentence. So it'll be interesting to see how much the judge takes into account their testimony, as well as what those recommended sentences will have to do when it comes to sentencing the three that did go to trial.
Yeah, very interesting facet of this case. Two of the five pled guilty, and looks like they're all going to face about the same amount of time in prison after all. You would think that the guilty pleas and the idea to cooperate with the prosecution would buy you much less time than the defendants in a case like this, but this time it did not.
And they're still facing state charges.
There's state charges left to go, second-degree murder charges. I mean, the second-degree murder charge itself, if they're found guilty of that,
we're waiting
you're looking
on
at
the
60
verdict
years
on
in
the
prison as a
state.
maximum.
They're
So
still
there's still,
deliberating.
as my father used to say, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. There's a long way to go before all of this is actually prosecuted and taken out to the fullest extent of the law. You know what, let's take a look at the jury breakdown again. 12 people on the jury. There were two alternates in this case, and this was the breakdown: 4 white men, 3 white women, 4.
Oh, yeah. And last night I found out that the jury was there were no African American people on the jury. All white. Majority men, I think.
Black women, 2 black men, 1 black man, 1 Asian as alternates. So the racial and gender makeup of the jury seems it was agreed upon very quickly. They actually sat this jury much more quickly than they thought they might.
They did.
They
thought it was going to take some time because they had so many jurors to choose from, but it took just a few days, and they had them all seated.
They had a pool of over 200, and in about a day and a half, they went through the voir dire process and had a jury seated and began this trial pretty judiciously.
We all thought that all of the jurors were going to come from Shelby County, but they did not. They came from Lauderdale County, Tipton County, some from Shelby County, but also some from Fayette County as well. So a wide variety of jurors that they had a chance to choose from.
Well, defense attorneys had pressed time and time again to have this case moved. They wanted the federal case moved simply because of the media attention. They pled the case that they could not get a fair trial in Memphis because of the media attention, and that was shot down very, very quickly. So again, let's recap one more time as we're now 20 minutes into this broadcast, and we have a verdict. We have 3 verdicts, if you will, in the civil trial. I'm sorry, the federal trial in the death of Tyre Nichols. So we're being told. Hold on one second.
It looks like family is coming out.
Let's go there live. Let's listen in.
All of them have been convicted of something, and they're all going to jail. That's how I feel. This has been a long journey for our family. I'm actually in shock right now because I still can't believe all this stuff is going on. But we're happy that they all have been convicted and they have been arrested.
And that's very important, that the jury found all of them in some way participated in a crime, and that Tyre Nichols' death won't go unaccounted for. That is critical. We know that this is the federal case. It's different from the state case, but in the federal court, all 5 of them, 2 pled guilty, 3 of them have been found guilty of charges, and they all, as the judge articulated, have been taken into custody. So the family was very relieved that the killers of Tyre Nichols have been taken into custody and have been found guilty. Now you will hear from Attorney Tony Romanucci before any of the other family members may speak.
Thank you, everybody. Today was monumentous because you had two defendants who pled guilty to deprivation of rights under color of law. They testified in this courtroom. The remaining defendants have all been found guilty of one charge or more: obstruction, conspiracy, deprivation of rights causing bodily injury. This is justice for Tyre. This is a very high burden that this government had in order to prove 12 counts against all of these individuals, and they proved more than half of them.
That's right.
So we are grateful to the federal government. We're grateful to the jury for paying attention, His Honor for a clean trial, and now we look forward to justice. We look forward to the state case, the civil case, because what we know is these officers conspired.
That's right.
They made an agreement.
That's right.
They made an agreement to cause harm, and now they are in jail.
Y'all please hit the like button.
You're gonna hear from
Yeah, if
Mr.
y'all
Wells
want me to
in
continue
just a
to play
minute.
this, I need for y'all to hit the
It's
like
very
button and
important that
support
we
the
thank
platform.
Kristen Clark
Yes.
and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice for bringing these charges and zealously prosecuting this case. Now you will hear from Mr. Rodney Wells, the father of Tyre Nichols.
I just want to say for the family that we are all elated. We're all very, very happy that these guys have been put in jail. This is a long time coming. And justice for Tyre. So we're just so very proud that all of them are going to jail today. We cannot wait on the sentencing, so we'll know what their total time will be. But today was a very good day for our family.
And now you will hear from Judge Ernestine Doris, who will make a statement before you hear from his uncle.
Today is a day that we, in fact, got justice for Tyre, and I'd just like to thank the government for their work in getting this done and their diligence and the way that this matter was held and handled before the court, so that we know that, notwithstanding anything that we think, there is justice.
Yes.
It is very important to note that all of them were pointing the fingers at each other. So all of them said that the others had something to do with the death of Tyre Nichols. That is very important, especially as we go forward to the other cases, whether it be the state criminal charge, but especially the civil case, the wrongful death civil rights violation, because the violation of Tyre Nichols' civil rights led to his death. And the blood is on the hand of the Memphis Police Department. Right. And we're thankful to the jury for this first step of justice. Now you will hear from his Uncle Johnny.
First and foremost, I'd just like to thank you all for being here for our family. I thank the federal government. They really worked very hard for Tyre. And I'd like to thank God for watching over us and for our families. And, you know, like they said, they're all in prison. They're not getting out anytime soon, and it's not over. I'd just like to say, you know, let this be a message to all officers, you know, that, you know, you will reap what you sow.
That's right.
You know, I mean, you just can't go around hurting people and think that you're not going to be accountable for it. So let this be a message, because Tyre's death did not go in vain. And that's all I'd like to
Now
say.
you hear from his sister, Kiwana. Kiana, I'm sorry. Kiana, you want
I just want to say, I don't know if I'm happy, but it's a bittersweet day. I will never get my little brother back, but to see those officers held accountable for what they did and put our family through did give us some hope for the future, and maybe this won't ever happen to another family in the future, but I just so thankful. I was smiling when I saw them get taken away into custody, because that's part of the, that's just one of the things that they did with him. What they did to my brother was wrong, and to see them go into custody and be held accountable was anything and everything that my family could ask for.
Justice for Tyre Nichols.
Justice for Tyre Nichols.
We'd like to thank all the activists, all the state representatives, everybody, all the faith-based community, everybody who stood for justice to say that Tyre deserved humanity, Tyre deserved his constitutional rights, and Tyre deserved to get home to his mother and father. Ms. Robin, would you like to say the last word?
I just want to say to all of you guys, thank you so much
This was
for
the
covering
federal
the story the correct
about
way.
5-6
and I
months ago.
appreciate the love and everything that you guys have given our family and to the communities of Memphis. Thank you for all the prayers.
The
and
verdict
all the
is
love.
still
Just
out
thank you
on
so
the
much.
state.
We appreciate it all.
Anything else, Kareem? Anything else, family?
Nope.
Justice for Tyre Nichols. Justice for Tyre Nichols. Justice for Tyre Nichols. Justice for Tyre Nichols.
Justice for Tyre.
You heard from him, you heard from Attorney Ramanucci, you heard from Tyre's mother and father, Rovon Wells and Rodney Wells, his uncle, his sister, many of them out there.
Their deliberations of who
Please
should
hit
be
the like
punished
button.
most severely. We know that Martin and those all pointed the fingers at each other. And not only they're going to have to answer to the judge when he sentences them, most importantly, they're going to have to answer to God.
I ain't never lied.
Attorney Crump, you are wanting a guilty verdict on all counts,
We
correct?
got, and that's what I was sitting there holding hands with Mr. Wells and Miss Wells, and when they heard a guilty conviction for each one of them, they thanked God right there as they were sitting in the courtroom. But then, when the judge said, U.S. Marshals, take them all into custody, Mr. Wells said, thank God, all of them going to jail for what they did to my boy.
Thank you.
Justice for Tyre. Justice for Tyre. Justice for Tyre.
Heard from, that was Attorney Ben Crump, who has been with the family since the very beginning. We also heard, as you said, from Darcy, from Tony
So we'll
Ramanucci,
kind of
defense
know
attorney.
what
He
to
had some of
expect
the
with this
most poignant
verdict
words, if you
that
will. He
we're
said today was
waiting on for the
monumental.
state.
This is justice for Tyre.
12 counts is where it started.
12 counts. And they got guilty verdicts on 6 of them. And the family said, you heard Rovon Wells say it first. The mother of Tyre Nichols stepped to the microphone first out of that group and said, we are happy. We have guilty verdicts. And it was Rodney Wells who followed that up by saying, the U.S. Marshals are taking them into custody.
He gonna get the
What
most
more
on the
could we
state
ask
like
for?
he did on the federal.
I believe it was Tyre's uncle who says you reap what you sow. You cannot go around and not be held accountable.
Absolutely.
Rovon says she is elated, and this has been a long
Okay,
time
right.
coming, and the family together said justice for Tyre.
So
I
again,
didn't
it's very, as
realize
you continue to see the
he had
final
witness
charges and the
tampering.
verdict flash up on your screen. We roll through these 3 defendants. It's very important to point out that while, yes, there were not guilty verdicts on the unreasonable force charges and the deliberate indifference charges, the guilty verdicts in the obstruction of justice charges and conspiracy to obstruct justice charges each carry 20 years in prison as a maximum. So there are 2 of the 3 individuals that could be facing up to 40 years in prison. That notwithstanding, the state trial has yet to begun. That's where, if you will, not to take any gravity away from this 4-week federal trial, but that's where they will all stand trial on second-degree murder charges with a maximum sentence of 60 years, not to mention other charges that the state has filed in regards to this case.
I'm going to go back out to Fox 13's Kayla Solomon. Again, she has been on top of the story from the very beginning. She's been in the courtroom for the last 19 days. Kayla, so much emotion coming from Tyre Nichols' family, but also his attorneys as well.
A great bathroom begins with an even greater selection of styles, which all begins at Floor & Decor.
From Tina Fey and the creator of Saturday Night Live comes Mean Girls, the hilarious hit Broadway music.
Yeah, you heard it there from.
Okay, listen, y'all. In order for me to continue to play this while we're waiting on the state verdict, I need for y'all to help me like I'm trying to keep y'all informed. This is for educational information purposes only. But I need support. I need likes. My Cash App is $AUNTEAFEE. It's well over 300 people. It was 500 not long ago. I need the likes to match. It's just that simple. I'm going back to the federal charges when that trial ended so that we can kind of compare it to the state while we are waiting for the verdict. The verdict is still out. They are still deliberating. And if you don't want to support the platform, then go find the service, the information somewhere else. We are okay with that. Right, T-Sippers? We are okay with that. But if you want to be over here and you want to listen, we need you to support the platform. It's just that simple. AunTeaFee has spoken. Get my likes up. Hey, Cynthia.
Attorneys Ben Crump and Antonio Romanucci, as well as Robbie and Rovon Wells, the parents of Tyre Nichols, saying that although they weren't found guilty on all charges, they were thrilled that each person was found guilty of at least one charge. And right after that verdict came down, U.S. Marshals took each man into custody. So at this point, the question is, how much of a sentence will the judge give them? We know they were all found guilty of that obstruction of justice charge and conspiracy, and that carries a sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. And of course, once the state trial happens next year, there could be additional time in state prison as well.
Yeah, Kayla, that was one of the things we were discussing as well. And I don't want to get too deep into the minutia, but when that state trial does begin, of course, everyone is going to be focused on the second-degree murder charges. But just like the federal trial, there are other charges in that case as well. This is going to be very significant.
Yeah, and again, the state charges also have to do with the cover-up that each former officer did that night. Now, we know that these same three defendants will be part of that state trial, as Emmett Martin and Desmond Mills already pleaded guilty, and that guilty plea will potentially carry over to the state case as well.
We know that these former officers are going to be sentenced, at least in this federal trial, at some point in February. At that point, that's when the state case begins. Again, we talked about second-degree murder, but they're also looking at aggravated assault, 2 charges of aggravated kidnapping, 2 charges of official misconduct, and 1 charge of official oppression as well.
And that's not to mention the civil lawsuit, which the burden of proof in a civil lawsuit is different than a criminal trial. So that third trial in federal court, which goes back to federal court, is going to look really a lot different than these 2 previous trials, as this one looks different than the state trial, which is coming up, as Kayla said at the beginning of the year. So Kayla, I wanted to get your take on one more thing. You know, again, we talked about the fact that a lot of people really expected, I think the general public really expected to see more guilty verdicts. They expected those obstruction charges to come back with a guilty verdict. Benjamin Crump seemed jubilant with the fact that they did get 6 of the 12 charges. They did get guilty verdicts on 6 of the 12.
Well, Kayla, before you answer, I also feel that Tyre Nichols' parents, they felt like, okay, we at least got guilty on something.
Yeah, it's hard to convict the police.
Yeah, part of that is, and you heard Attorney Crump say it, the burden of proof is much higher in a federal case, especially a criminal case like this one. So they just wanted some form of a guilty plea so that each person could be sentenced to prison, although we don't know how long that will be at this point. They just wanted some form of accountability. You heard them say that word multiple times during that media scrum we just had, but they just wanted some form of accountability. So the fact that each person was found guilty of at least one count, that says a lot. They also implied the fact that that brings the tally up to all 5 who will be serving some sort of prison time in this case.
Nobody got out.
I also heard, when Ben Crump said, when Judge Norris made it very clear, U.S. Marshals take all defendants into custody.
Did we expect that? Kayla, did we expect them to be taken into custody immediately, or did we expect there to be an easement?
No, it's different from every courtroom. It's different from every judge. So when you do hear for a U.S. Marshal to immediately take someone into custody, it is a little surprising, especially considering that their sentencing isn't until January. So that's partially why the family said they felt a little bit of joy in this very gloomy situation. Of course, they can't get their son back, they can't get their brother back, but what they can do is know that 3 of the people found guilty of a charge that led up to Tyre Nichols' death, they are being held in custody for the time being.
That is Fox 13's Kayla Solomon reporting live at federal court. Of course, we're going to go back to Kayla shortly.
Absolutely. So the words of the day coming from the family of Tyre Nichols, Rovon Wells, happy with a guilty verdict.
Elated.
She said, thank God. Rodney Wells, elated, proud you're all going to jail today. Speaking of the 3 officers who were facing the charges in this federal trial. Of course, there were 5, but 2 had pled guilty and actually turned state's evidence and testified against the other 3. And Benjamin Crump, and that was really where I wanted Kayla to go, because one of the things I think a lot of people don't understand, and maybe I didn't have a full, comprehension of the fact, is the burden of proof at the federal level is very different than it is at the state level, and what they're going to face in those murder charges here in Shelby County. Federal prosecutors really had a job before them to get to this level and to get guilty verdicts in 6 of the 12 charges.
They did. Again, 3 defendants, 3 former Memphis police officers, Justin Smith, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley. They have all been found guilty of a charge, some more than one charge. Tadarius Bean, guilty on count 4, which was obstruction of justice. Demetrius Haley was found guilty on counts 3 and 4, which I believe was conspiracy to witness tamper and obstruction of justice.
Witness tampering.
Demetrius Haley, again, found guilty. I take that back. Demetrius Haley found guilty on charges 3 and 4, but he was also found guilty on 2 lesser charges, deprivation of rights, but also causing bodily harm. And Justin Smith, facing 1 count, obstruction of justice. He was found not guilty on the first 3 counts.
And we have to remember, this has been just over a year and a half in the making, almost 2 years in the making.
Shortly.
Absolutely. So the words of the day coming from the family of Tyre Nichols, Rovon Wells, happy with a guilty verdict.
Elated.
She said, thank God. Rodney Wells, elated, proud you're all going to jail today. Speaking of the 3 officers who were facing the charges in this federal trial. Of course, there were 5, but 2 had pled guilty and actually turned state's evidence and testified against the other 3.
This
and
is
Benjamin Crump, and
the
that
federal.
was really where I wanted Kayla to go.
This is the
because
federal.
one of the things I think a lot of people don't
The
understand,
verdict
and maybe
is
I didn't
still
have a
out
full,
on the state.
comprehension of the fact, is the burden of proof at the federal level is very different than
I
it
did
is
not remember that
at the
Haley
state level, and what
had
they're going to face in
witnessed
those murder charges
tampering.
here in Shelby County. Federal prosecutors really had a job before them to get to this level and to get guilty verdicts in 6 of the 12 charges.
They did. Again, 3 defendants, 3 former Memphis police officers, Justin Smith, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley. They have all been found guilty of a charge, some more than 1 charge. Tadarius Bean, guilty on count 4, which was obstruction of justice. Demetrius Haley was found guilty on counts 3 and 4, which I believe was conspiracy to witness tamper and obstruction of justice. Demetrius Haley.
I think on this, in the state that we are waiting on a verdict for, I think he is going to get the most in the state as he did in the federal. I think that he is, this is my opinion, is attached to organized crime. He has some things going on in the, he worked in the jail, the state jail where he may be on his way back to. He had gave up confidential information to a prisoner, excessive abuse charges and lawsuits. He was fired from there and then went to the Scorpion unit. Now I'm remembering a rehearing on the federal that amongst all these charges, he also has witness tampering. Witness tampering. What witness? Yeah.
Again, found guilty.
Again, I'm going to say they thought they had Marcus
on charges
Thornton.
3 and 4, but he was also found guilty on 2 lesser charges: deprivation of rights, but also
He was
causing
also
bodily
the one
harm.
that passed the picture around.
And Justin Smith.
The sweetest moments deserve
He
the
sent
boldest
the
flavors.
picture of him
Like our new concrete mixers and lemon ice
near
coolers.
death to 11 people.
Facing 1 count, obstruction of justice. He was found not guilty on the first 3 counts.
And we have to remember, this has been just over a year and a half in the making, almost 2 years in the making. This all began January 7th. It was a Saturday night back in 2023. That's where officers stopped Tyre Nichols at a traffic stop, an initial traffic stop as it was described by officers. He did stop. He seemed to comply, but then was pulled out of the car. He was pepper sprayed, and he ran away from that incident. He ran away from that scene. He ran from the officers down the block, only 2 blocks from his home. And here's where it ended.
He was so close. And in the video, we know that he was kicked, beaten, tased, pepper sprayed as well.
Now, this is the corner of Castlegate Lane and Bear Creek Cove. He was within shouting distance of his mother's house. This is a Skycop camera that captured these still frame pictures that you see. And one of the big arguments that the prosecution laid out, and you're probably going to hear this time and time again in the state trial, is that no one on the scene, none of the officers immediately rendered aid. After he was incapacitated and seemingly unconscious, none of those officers did anything to help. Of course, there are EMTs, fire department members who have also
lost their jobs.
They've lost their jobs. They faced suspensions and then lost their jobs because it was determined by their employers, the city of Memphis, they did not render aid in a timely manner. And that's where that indifference charge seems to start to tie in. It was 3 days afterwards, after this beating, on Saturday, January 7th. January 10th, Tyre Nichols died of his wounds in the hospital.
Which were severe. They were very extreme. I believe that his mother also made it very clear that her son had swelling of the brain, kidney failure because of his injuries. They were extreme, to say the least.
He had heart injuries. He had internal injuries that are undescribable unless you were in a major car wreck. Of course, that led to you do have to give the Shelby County District Attorney's Office and the MPD credit for the fact they released all available video as quickly as they could. Pictures, still frame pictures. You saw the Skycop just a moment ago. We've seen body camera footage as you take a look at some of Tyre Nichols' photography work. He was known to be a photographer in the neighborhood.
Skateboarder.
All of that was laid out very, very quickly for the public to see. So you do have to give credit for that. But soon after that, the MPD Scorpion unit, which was charged with high-value crimes, they were soon disbanded.
We're talking about auto theft. We're talking about searching down gang members. We're talking about
high-value crimes.
And Davis did not want to dismantle it.
And I believe it was interim police chief CJ
I
Davis
seek
that
in
said
serenity.
what he was pulled over initially for was a misdemeanor, not a high-value crime, not being a part of a gang, not for drugs, not auto theft, not for guns, but a misdemeanor. And this is where we are today.
And the officers testified in court that they were angry that night because they had been pepper sprayed themselves as part of this process.
Also that he tried to run.
And that he did flee police. His mother said time and time again that he was simply terrified and had no understanding
Of what was going
happening
on.
to him.
I don't
wait
either.
for the sentencing, which will happen early next
I don't
year.
have no understanding.
We also wait for the state charges that these officers will be facing as well.
I believe we still have Fox 13's Kayla Solomon. Nope, we do not. We've got Kayla down there. She's working on getting reaction. I would imagine she's waiting on prosecutors to come out and possibly defense attorneys. Actually, we do have Kayla. Kayla, is there any indication at all that you're going to hear from either A, the prosecution, or B, defense attorneys as well?
Yeah, at this point, it's unclear. We've been standing out here for about 20 minutes now, and we still have not seen any of the prosecutors come out. We also haven't seen any of the defense attorneys. But I will divert your attention over here across the street. The family of Tyre Nichols and some of the activists are still over there. There are supporters that came out here yelling justice for Tyre Nichols during this entire thing. Now, I want to tell you also that we heard from the family. We heard their thoughts on the verdict. We also heard everything that they felt. They said they were just happy that each defendant was found guilty of at least one charge, and they were immediately taken into custody. So again, we've heard from the family, we've heard from attorneys, in this case the attorneys for the Nichols family rather, and at this point we're just waiting to see if any of the defense attorneys will come out and speak, any of the prosecutors, either from the DOJ or from the local office here, the AUSA's office. So yeah, we're still waiting out here for them. And of course, once we do have that, we'll attempt to get comments from them because each of their clients were immediately.
Please hit the like button. It's free. And we are still waiting for the state trial verdict. It's still out. We're just recapping what happened at the federal level about 6-7 months ago.
Taken into custody.
I also heard, when Ben Crump said, when Judge Norris made it very clear, U.S. Marshals take all defendants into custody.
Did we expect that? Kayla, did we expect them to be taken into custody immediately, or did we expect there to be an easement?
No, it's different from every courtroom. It's different from every judge. So when you do hear for a U.S. Marshal to immediately take someone into custody, it is a little surprising, especially considering that their sentencing isn't until January. So that's partially why the family said they felt a little bit of joy in this very gloomy situation. Of course, they can't get their son back. They can't get their brother back. But what they can do is know that 3 of the people found guilty of a charge that led up to Tyre Nichols' death, they are being held in custody for the time being.
That is Fox 13's Kayla Solomon reporting live at federal court. Of course, we're going to go back to Kayla shortly.
Absolutely. So the words of the day coming from the family of Tyre Nichols.
Hey, Smokelahoma.
To Rovon Wells. Happy.
This is
with a guilty
recapping the
verdict.
federal trial.
She said, thank God. Rodney Wells, elated, proud.
While
we're
we're
all going
waiting
to
on the
jail today.
verdict.
Speaking of the
Shout out
3
to the
officers who
smoke.
were facing the charges in this federal trial. Of course, there were 5, but 2 had pled guilty and actually turned state's evidence and testified against the other 3. And Benjamin Crump, and that was really where I wanted Kayla to go, because one of the things I think a lot of people don't understand, and maybe I didn't have a full, comprehension of the fact, is the burden of proof at the federal level is very different than it is at the state level, and what they're going to face in those murder charges here in Shelby County. Federal prosecutors really had a job before them to get to this level.
Smokelahoma, you've been following the trial?
6 of the 12 charges.
They did. Again, 3 defendants, 3 former Memphis police
And how you
officers,
been?
Justin Smith, Tadarius Bean,
You been all right?
Demetrius Haley. They have all been found guilty of a charge, some more than one charge. Tadarius Bean, guilty on count 4, which was obstruction of justice. Demetrius Haley was found guilty on counts 3 and 4, which I believe was conspiracy to witness tamper and obstruction of justice. Demetrius Haley, again, found guilty. I take that back. Demetrius Haley found guilty on charges 3 and 4, but he was also found guilty on 2 lesser charges, deprivation of rights, but also causing bodily harm. And Justin Smith, facing 1 count, obstruction of justice. He was found not guilty on the first 3 counts.
And we have to remember, this has been just over a year and a half in the making, almost 2 years in the making. This all began January 7th. It was a Saturday night back in 2023. That's where officers stopped Tyre Nichols at a traffic stop, an initial traffic stop as it was described by officers. He did stop. He seemed to comply, but then was pulled out of the car. He was pepper sprayed, and he ran away from that incident. He ran away from that scene. He ran from the officers down the block, only 2 blocks from his home. And here's where it ended.
He was so close. And in the video, we know that he was kicked, beaten, tased, pepper sprayed as well.
Now, this is the corner of Castlegate Lane and Bear Creek Cove. He was within shouting distance of his mother's house. This is a Skycop camera that captured these still frame pictures that you see. And one of the big arguments that the prosecution laid out, and you're probably going to hear this time and time again in the state trial, is that no one on the scene, none of the officers immediately rendered aid. After he was incapacitated and seemingly unconscious, none of those officers did anything to help. Of course, there are EMTs, fire department members who have also they've lost their jobs. They faced suspensions and then lost their jobs because
I think his mom and daddy should sue them all. Every last one of them.
They did not render aid in a timely manner, and that's where that indifference charge seems to start to tie in. It was 3 days afterwards, after this beating, on Saturday, January 7th. January 10th, Tyre Nichols died of his wounds in the hospital.
Which were severe. They were very extreme. I believe that his mother also made it very clear that her son had swelling of the brain, kidney failure because of his injuries. They were extreme, to say the least.
He had heart injuries. He had internal injuries that are undescribable unless you were in a major car wreck. Of course, that led to you do have to give the Shelby County District Attorney's Office and the MPD credit for the fact they released all available video as quickly as they could. Pictures, still frame pictures. You saw the Skycop just a moment ago. We've seen body camera footage as you take a look at some of Tyre Nichols' photography work. He was known to be a photographer in the neighborhood.
Skateboarder.
All of that was laid out very, very quickly for the public to see. So you do have to give credit for that. But soon after that, the MPD Scorpion Unit, which was charged with high-value crimes, they were soon disbanded.
We're talking about auto theft. We're talking about searching down gang members. We're talking about
high-value
crimes. High-value crimes. Right. And I believe it was Interim Police Chief C.J. Davis that said what he was pulled over initially for was a misdemeanor, not a high-value crime.
Should have never been stopped.
Not for drugs, not auto theft, not for guns, but a misdemeanor.
Hi, Liz.
And this is where we are today.
And the officers testified in court that they were angry that night because they had been pepper sprayed themselves as part of this process.
Also that he tried to run.
And that he did flee police. His mother said time and time again that he was simply terrified and had no understanding of what was happening to him.
So while we wait for the sentencing, which will happen early next year, we also
this is the federal. We're waiting on the verdict on the state.
Well.
I believe we still have Fox 13's Kayla Solomon. Nope, we do not. We've got Kayla down there. She's working on getting reaction. I would imagine she's waiting on prosecutors to come out and possibly defense attorneys. Actually, we do have Kayla. Kayla, is there any indication at all that you're going to hear from either A, the prosecution, or B, defense attorneys as well?
Yeah, at this point, it's unclear. We've been standing out here for about 20 minutes now, and we still have not seen any of the prosecutors come out. We also haven't seen any of the defense attorneys. But I will divert your attention over here across the street. The family of Tyre Nichols and some of the activists are still over there. There are supporters that came out here yelling justice for Tyre Nichols during this entire thing. Now, I want to tell you also that we heard from the family. We heard their thoughts on the verdict. We also heard everything that they felt. They said they were just happy that each defendant was found guilty of at least one charge, and they were immediately taken into custody. So again, we've heard from the family, we've heard from attorneys, in this case the attorneys for the Nichols family rather, and at this point we're just waiting to see if any of the defense attorneys will come out and speak, any of the prosecutors, either from the DOJ or from the local office here, the AUSA's office. So yeah, we're still waiting out here for them. And of course, once we do have that, we'll attempt to get comments from them because each of their clients were immediately taken into custody.
Kayla, you mentioned, actually, you showed us just a moment ago that small group of people who were across the street. Throughout this trial, I don't think we've seen many protesters. We haven't seen that many people on the street just speaking their voice about what's going on inside that building. Have you?
Yeah, there's actually been community activists in the courtroom every single day. I think out of respect for the family, they were deciding not really to speak publicly, but the entire time they've been here every day, sitting in the courtroom with the family, and every day we've seen them walk in with the family and leave. So they have been very present, but of course they're leaving it up to the family to do the talking as well as the attorneys.
All right, very good.
That is Fox 13's Kayla Solomon reporting live. Of course, we're going to continue to talk to Kayla throughout her newscast.
Yeah, stay on standby, Kayla, because as soon as those attorneys walk out, we would love to hear from, there are three sides to this case. There's the family, not three sides, but three facets, if you will, three angles. The family who we've heard from. The defense attorneys, it's going to be interesting to get their take. And of course, federal prosecutors. We thought initially they might be a little disappointed with this verdict, but maybe not. Getting 6 guilties out of 12 charges. According to Benjamin Crump, as he just said, that's actually a really good day in federal court, and that he feels justice was served for Tyre.
We definitely thought that some of the other counts they were definitely going to find them guilty on, but they did not. But it was the reaction from Ben Crump, from Attorney Ramanucci, and even the family that was a little shocking. I just thought that they were going to be more upset, but they weren't. They were just happy that these officers were found guilty on something.
And I think that Tony Ramanucci and Ben Crump probably prepped them for this because, they've been here, done this. And I would imagine, I'm not there, I haven't been privy to any of these conversations, but I would imagine that both Crump and Ramanucci said, hey, this is probably how it's going to go down. And if we get a guilty verdict on any of the 4 charges, we're really doing something special.
Especially being a federal case.
That's exactly because the bar is so high on a federal case. In fact, let's go to Benjamin Crump, because just a moment ago when he came out of the courthouse about 20 minutes ago, he did a pretty good job of explaining exactly how and why the family is pleased with this verdict.
This has been a long journey for our family. I'm actually in shock right now because I still can't believe all this stuff is going on. But we're happy that they all have been convicted and they have been arrested.
And that's very important, that the jury found all of them in some way participated in a crime, and that Tyre Nichols' death won't go unaccounted for.
We also heard from Tyre Nichols' sister, who was out there with the family today. This has to.
The verdict is still out on the stage.
She said she was very close to Tyre Nichols, and she said for her, this looks like justice for her.
What they did to my brother was wrong, and to see them go into custody and be held accountable was anything and everything that my family could ask for.
Kenya Dixon.
So again, the family?
Pleased.
Very pleased
at the guilty verdict.
with the fact that these individuals, again, were, taken out of court, led away by U.S. Marshals in handcuffs, and they will immediately go into the federal system.
Be behind bars.
Of course, that sentencing, as Kayla has pointed out, Fox 13's Kayla Solomon, who's been knee-deep in this trial since the very beginning, explained that sentencing is yet to come. There will be 2 other dates for the other 2 individuals, the other 2 former officers who actually turned to state's evidence, if you will, and they testified against the 3 who were on trial here in this federal system. All of the sentencing are going to be separate, so that's yet to come. But up to 20 years on each count that were found guilty on.
The obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and then the 2 lesser charges, which were the excessive force and deliberate indifference, which I believe Demetrius Haley
Demetrius
faces.
Haley, right. And of course, keep in mind, and we pointed it out, but we have to
He
keep
gonna
reminding
probably,
everyone,
to
keep
me,
reminding ourselves,
in
this
my,
is just the
what
first
I
step out
think,
of three
he gonna get the most
for all of
charge
these 5 officers. Up
in the
next
state.
is
Haley.
the state trial. That's going to begin at the beginning of the year. The state trial is where you're going to see, as Kayla Solomon pointed out right at the
He was
bottom
the
of the
first
hour,
one yanked him
5:30,
out
the second-degree
at
murder
the first
charges,
location, and
along
once
with
he
more
arrived at the
obstruction
second
charges.
location, he
So,
said beat his
that
ass.
second-degree murder charge carries a maximum
And they started
of
kicking
60
him and beating him
years in
again.
prison, and all 5 are going to face that. So there's still a lot at play here. We're far from done.
You know, there was so much reaction in our newsroom, and Kayla said there was reaction even on the street. We're going to turn to Fox 13's Jack Bilyeu, who's also down at federal court today and has reaction as well. Jack.
Yeah, good evening, guys.
Hit the like button, y'all. Get my likes up. Please get the likes up so I can continue. Get the likes up, y'all.
On opposite. Tyre Nichols' family loaded up in the car to head off. We saw his mother, Rovon Wells, giving a lot of hugs. One thing they said, Attorney Crump said during his brief media availability after the hearing was to express thanks to all the activists who were involved in this. And of course, I mean, as y'all saw during those live interviews, they were surrounded by those activists. We got a chance to speak to a couple of them as, the scene here was kind of breaking down and people were heading home. The big thing that they all stressed to us was that, this is far from over. The federal side of things is over, but we've still got civil cases ahead. We've still got the state charges. And
we're waiting
they tell
on
us
the
they
state
plan to be
verdict.
here the whole time. And it's the same thing with that family. I mean, the closure that they got here today, there's still a lot ahead of them. This is far from over. All right, Jack, that's Fox 13's Jack Bilyeu live outside the federal courthouse. Forgive us, we're taken off guard there. We're getting a lot of information pouring into our ears. Jack, stand by. We're going to be coming back to you here in just a moment because, again, we did not expect, of course, at any time the jury is handed the case, very quickly, but we did not expect this to come down as quickly as it did because the jury did not get this case until just before 11 a.m. today, and they deliberated for roughly 5 hours, about 5 hours 15 minutes, because we found out about what 4:15.
The state is still
deliberating. And said,
deliberating.
"Hey, we've got a verdict." And it takes time. The judge has to call everybody back into the courtroom, get everybody set, reseat the jury, and then Each defendant one by one. We did not. He didn't read them off en masse. They read them off one by one. So again, here about 12 minutes before. Some not guilty. Can we pop them up on screen really fast so we can go through the verdicts?
The 3 officers.
There we go. That's Darius Bean. The unreasonable force charge, not guilty. Deliberate indifference.
I think he's
not
going to
guilty.
get the
Conspiracy
second
to
least.
obstruct,
I think
not
Justin's
guilty.
going to get the
But
least.
Darius Bean
then
was
him,
found guilty on a
and
specific
Haley going to get the
obstruction
most.
of justice charge.
We also have Demetrius Haley. Unreasonable force, guilty. Deprivation of rights, guilty. Those are the 2 lesser charges. Conspiracy to obstruct, guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. Those last 2 charges, again, 20 years apiece.
Now, as for the charges against Justin Smith, he was found not guilty of unreasonable force and deliberate indifference, as well as conspiracy to obstruct, but was found guilty on obstruction of justice charges. So there you have it. 6 of the 12 charges that were laid out in federal court, the prosecution did get guilty verdicts in 6. And again, all 3, actually all 5, including the 2 who pled out on the way into this case, are looking at prison time. And here's what they're looking at. On the conspiracy to obstruct, 20 years. Obstruction of justice, 20 years. That conspiracy to obstruct means that they talked among themselves.
Yeah,
That's the conspiracy.
come on, get the lights up. I'm going to go ahead and end this
So
until
they
the
could be
verdict.
facing, some of these guys could be facing up to 40 years in prison. Of course, those sentencings are set to come at the very beginning of the year.
And then at that point, they will now begin the state charges that they will be facing as well. That case is expected to start possibly sometime in the month of February. And of course, we will be there. Just like we were there for this federal trial, we will be at that state trial as well.
Just like we were outside the courtroom as the family walked out and expressed their relief and their jubilation that they did get guilty verdicts and that all 5 of these individuals will face prison time for the death of Tyre Nichols. Let's play it back. Let's listen to Tyre Nichols' uncle and his explanation of his feeling after this day.
Let this be a message to all officers, that, you will reap what you sow.
That's right.
You just can't go around hurting people and think that you're not going to be accountable for it. So let this be a message, because Tyre's death did not go in vain.
Tyre's death did not go in vain. Memphis Police Chief, Inter Police Chief C.J. Davis, I do remember when the video came out, when it first came out, and I remember that she approached the media saying that what she saw, she called it heinous and she called it reckless.
But she
behavior
didn't
from
want
her
to
officers.
dismantle
We
the
also
Scorpion
have
unit.
sound tonight from MPD. Let's take a listen. From the city of Memphis, rather.
All right, so we
Statement from the city of
got a
Memphis.
statement, and it's not much.
It's not much at all.
From the Memphis Police Department, a spokesperson, and again, understanding this is litigation. The quote, as standard practice, we do not comment on pending litigation. Now, even though we have a verdict in this specific trial, the federal trial, there are still 2 more trials to go. There's a state trial against the 5 officers where they'll face those murder charges, plus probably the big one on behalf of the MPD and the city is that federal trial coming up, number 3 there in federal court, the civil lawsuit where the family of Tyre Nichols is seeking $550 million in damages against the city, the MPD, and there are individuals named within that trial as well. So we would not expect either the city or the MPD to be able to say anything, given the fact that there's still a long way to go in court.
And as you said, there's a long way to go. This is not the end. Now that this federal trial has wrapped itself up, this is not the end, because you still have 2 more trials that these officers are going to be facing as well.
And given that, let's go back to Fox 13's Kayla Solomon. Kayla, if you can, just give us your perspective here. How do these guilty verdicts, and even the not guilty verdicts against these 3 officers, play into that state trial, or will they at all? Or are they allowed to be considered?
Get your free copy of my new best-selling book, Commercial Real Estate Investing for Beginners. All you have to do is click on the link below.
Yeah, them all being found guilty of one obstruction of justice charge shows that
they are
the jurors
still
all
deliberating
agreed that
on the
they
state.
did have a conspiracy after the fact, which means they did attempt to cover it up. So we know that that's the one charge they were all found guilty of. But again, for the unreasonable force and the deliberate indifference, the fact that both Tadarius Bean and Justin Smith were found not guilty of those and also not guilty of the lesser charge, it shows that their defense attorneys were effective when they were telling the jurors that this was not meant to kill Tyre Nichols. No one denied that there were pieces that went, and that's one of the terms that Justin Smith used in the body-worn camera. There's also no denying that they each were trying to take down Tyre Nichols, and that a beating even happened. So all defense attorneys acknowledge that. But what they told the jurors were that their clients did less than some of the other defendants in this case. Now, Demetrius Haley was found guilty of all 4 charges to some degree. Now, the second charge and the first charge have to do with that unreasonable force and deliberate indifference. He was found guilty of causing bodily harm, which is just a degree lower than death. And we know that the sentencing could be a little different because of that little distinction that we have there. But we saw on video as Demetrius Haley did kick Tyre Nichols. Out of the 3 defendants, he was the one that we saw take a kick at Nichols' body as it was on the ground in that body-worn camera. So that is probably what had an effect on the jurors in this case.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's Fox 13's Kayla Solomon. Kayla, thank you for the explanation there. You know, again, one of the things that further complicated this, the jury had to examine each officer's actions separately. And, you know, as it's been explained to us time and time again through this process, the federal trials are very different in the fact that the burden of proof on behalf of the prosecution is very different. There's a very high bar. That's exactly what you heard Benjamin Crump say as he came out talking about the fact that they did get guilty charges on 6 of the 12 charges. So there's a very high bar. And when you take those officers' actions separately, it's hard to separate those out. You know, when you're watching that video.
You're watching the video.
I mean, it's been difficult for us because, you know, I remember when we first saw it compared to the 100th time we saw it. Every time it was like, my gosh, how do you do that? And then they have to determine if each respective former officer is guilty or innocent of each charge against them. So that jury had the responsibility of literally having to take this case, spread out over a 4-week time period, and put it into individual buckets. And if you've ever seen a juror's notepad, especially in a federal trial,
It can look like this.
Pages and pages and pages of notes, and then they have to go through and try to figure out all of these separate buckets to come to those verdicts.
But you know how we felt watching the video. But as a juror, you're watching it again and again, slowing it down. You know, the defense attorneys, they also had to focus on their client. This is my client. He's not doing this, or he may be doing this. Right. But this is their client over there. Look what they're doing. So again, they literally had to look at each defendant and determine their impact, their action that led to Tyre Nichols' death.
So here we are, again, guilty on 6 of the 12 charges against those 3 defendants, 3 former MPD officers who were all facing that jury over the past 4 weeks. Let's take one more look at the jury makeup if we have that available, because I think it's important to note that this jury was not only made up of equal parts, if you will, as far as gender and race, but keep in mind this was not a Shelby County only jury. So if we'll take a look there, I believe we've got it somewhere.
I believe they came from Lauderdale.
No.
Fayette County and in Tipton County.
Yep. Again, 12 jurors, 2 alternates, equal men and women. The racial divide was also equal. So, and again, we said this earlier, Darcy, we were all taken aback a little bit of the fact that this jury was seated so quickly in just a day and a half. Typically that voir dire process, the selection of the jury, it takes more time than that because they had a pool of over 200 people to pull from that they selected out of, obviously hundreds of thousands of people. So to come to agreement on a jury that quickly said something for the veracity of this case.
But we know that these 3 officers will be heading to prison.
Absolutely. Those 3 officers were remanded into custody. Judge Mark Norris told the marshals to take them into custody immediately and lead them straight back into the jail system. They're now in the federal system.
Does your internet bill keep getting higher? That's because promo pricing is full of surprises. At Google Fiber,
Continue to follow news on the verdict in the Tyre Nichols trial.
Federal.
We're also still hearing back from the community. Tonight, we hear from a very close friend of Tyre Nichols.
Let's go to Fox 13's Lakia Scott live in downtown Memphis. So, Lakia, you caught up with her tonight. What did she have to say? What did she tell you?
Yeah, and this is a close friend who told us that she met Tyre Nichols in a church group in California. And she said that he was the last person who she would have expected to have been involved in such a tragic situation. And of the verdict for these 3 former Memphis police officers, she says the outcome is bittersweet, but that what is most important to her is that she hears accountability from those officers. She also told us what she would say to the men who killed her friend.
I think often of what I would say to those officers, something I've thought about since the day this happened. And it's actually changed drastically since this has happened. I've actually grown to have a lot of empathy for them. And I wish that they weren't in this position as much as I wish we were in this position. I wish they would have made better decisions, and I wish they would have taken more pride in the oath that they took.
I think I found myself having empathy for
And Angelina also tells us that she does plan on going to check on Tyre's family, his mom, his sisters, and she wants to let them know that today's outcome was a win. Daryl, Darcy.
That is Fox 13's Lakia Scott reporting live downtown tonight. Thank you, Lakia.
Okay, hold on.
One of 3 former
There was something else I wanted to. Yeah, they're still
How did we get here? The path to this day comes some
deliberating.
2 years and 5 months after Nichols was initially stopped at Hickory Hill. Since then, it has been a long and tedious process for those involved, and for Nichols' family, a painful and emotional time. Here's WRG's Shay Arthur with a look at how we got here.
where they are. For the last 8 days, we've taken you inside a Shelby County courtroom. Sometimes they were tense.
He got out of the car and he grabbed the guy that he thought had done something wrong.
Other times, emotional testimony. Shelby County District Attorney Steve Mulroy spoke to us about his team of attorneys on the case.
They've worked very hard for a long time in preparing this case. They were very thoroughly prepared, and they fought really hard to get justice for Tyre Nichols.
What's been discussed with so many closely watching goes back to this intersection, January 7th, 2023, at Ross and Rains Roads, where police claim they initially attempted to stop Tyre Nichols and ultimately ended in this quiet neighborhood about half a mile down the street, which we later learned from watching MPD body and dash camera video was also where Nichols was repeatedly punched and kicked not far from his family home. 3 days later, he died at the hospital. 10 days later, 5 Memphis police officers are fired, including the 3 who have been on trial, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith. The 2 others have reached other agreements on their charges. On January 26th, the group was indicted in state court. Then the next day, the shocking video of Nichols' arrest is released to the public. On January 28th, the Scorpion unit was deactivated. That was a specialized team these officers were part of. It was supposed to target criminal hotspots. Months later, on September 12, 2023, the men were federally indicted. And more than a year later, after weeks of a federal trial, on October 2nd, 2024, a federal jury reached a mixed verdict. Then fast forward, April 28th, 2025, the state trial for Smith, Bean, and Haley begins. For your news leader, Shay Arthur, WREG News Channel 3.
Hablemos del salario.
¿Qué es lo que ofrecen normalmente por esa posición?
¿Es competitivo?
Si competitivo fuera un número, ¿cuál sería?
Un número.
And as we mentioned at the top of this newscast, the trial of 3 former Memphis police officers charged in the beating death of Tyre Nichols is underway in downtown Memphis. Now, this is the state trial for Tadarius Bean, Justin Smith, and Demetrius Haley. They face 7 counts in the 2023 beating of Tyre Nichols during a traffic stop, the most serious second-degree murder. WREG's April Thompson is covering the trial for us. And April, the first witness is on the stand right now, right?
That's right, Alec.
Attorney Silva Mergadician. Silva, great to see you as always. Thank you so much for being on the show with me tonight. And I want to get your general thoughts on this case, especially with the idea of the situation, late at night, high risk stop. We heard some of that in the testimony we just heard, but also with the backdrop of the fact that the defendants on trial in this case are being painted as the people who are not perhaps the protagonists here. They were involved. They certainly did some things that are wrong. But this is a second-degree murder case, and I think the defense is focused on maybe getting them off on that charge.
Yeah, first of all, Michael, thank you so much for having me. You know, I adore you immensely. And gosh, on every level, Michael, this case gives you, it's everything that's wrong with policing when it comes to certain issues. Now, I will say it is the toughest job in the world. There's no two ways about it. You never know if a simple traffic stop is going to lead to violence. And Hemphill talked about that, the officer testifying about how inherently dangerous these stops can be. But there's such a stark difference in this case. Yes, he was running away. Yes, you should comply. You should stay. But the issue with this case is the groupthink gang violence that erupted from the police. You have horrible statements made by some of the officers. And, Officer Hemphill, he actually said, I hope they beat his, the ending of that. He wanted him, he actually was the first officer to actually tase him or use his taser. And then this eruption of violence escalates. And I think that's that theory of that second-degree murder issue, is that every single officer, regardless of what their role was, outside of Hemphill, the main officers here, whether one kicked or one hit or one tased, they are equally liable because without the escalation, we wouldn't be here. They all fed each other's rage, their wrath, if you will.
Right. And you know what's interesting? You can see where the defense is going in the questioning of Hemphill. As you mentioned, they're going to this point where, it's a high-risk stop to begin with. When he starts to run, it becomes even higher risk. And they're going to use that to try to explain the behavior. And then they're going to point the finger at the guy who initiated the stop. This guy, Officer Emmett Martin, who's not on trial here. He's going to stand trial separately because they're going to point the finger at him as the protagonist. But it sounds to me like you don't think that there's different levels of culpability because of the way this went down.
Again, Michael, this case is exceptional in that the video is so unbelievably intense and violent The words that are used by all the officers are intense and violent, and the escalation, right? So I think that's what differentiates this case, is that even, let's say, a lower culpability officer is using words that are essentially, let's do this, let's beat him up. This is not what police are supposed to do. Submission, calming the situation down. It looked like he was not a threat from what I saw in any capacity. Again, I do want to mention, it is the toughest job in the world. We respect police officers, but there's always going to be that bad people in every kind of case where stress gets to them and they lash out. And that's what appears in this case. These men were obviously under a lot of stress. They were part of a team, the Scorpion team, that was so respected. It almost feels like they thought they could get away with anything, because violence of this nature, no matter who it is, it's never allowed. It's not ethical. So it is an unethical case, and it reeks at the soul, because this young man doesn't really, I just don't see what he did to deserve this level of intensity.
And so it doesn't happen in a vacuum, as you mentioned. You know, this kind of thing happens because it's allowed to happen and fester and grow, and these guys felt they could get away with it at the end of the day. All right, stand by. I want to take folks back inside the courtroom now on the stand. Again,
They definitely thought they was going to get
former
away.
Memphis police officer. He was involved in that initial stop. He's now talking about drawing a gun when he and the Scorpion team approached Tyre Nichols' vehicle after he allegedly didn't stop the first time.
Officer. At that time, I was a police officer for about 3 years. And how long have you been on the Scorpion? About 3 months. And how often, if you can estimate, have you pulled over cars? Probably every day. Every work day? Yes, sir. For 3 years? Yes, sir. And this was the first time the car had fled and then stopped? Yes, sir. Describe what happened when you got there. When I arrived, I saw Haley and Martin approaching the car. I drew my pistol because
Haley and
I was trying to
Martin.
stop, and since he stopped, like what's fixing to happen, once I saw Haley and Martin
Gang
getting in the
leader.
cars, when I
The
put my
police
pistol
gang
up, they
leader.
ran up to the car. Who approached the driver's side? Haley. And what was he saying? I don't remember. Was he demanding that the driver get out of the car? I don't remember what he was saying. Did y'all get the driver out of the car? Yes, sir. Who did? Haley got him out of the car. How? Describe how he got him out of the car. If I recall, he opened up the driver's door and pulled Mr. Nichols out.
Please get my lights up, please, please. I need my likes up, please.
Force continue, correct? Yes, sir. And one of those levels is empty hands control, correct? Yes, sir. 2 categories, soft and hard. Yes, sir. Empty hands means no weapon in your hands, correct? Yes, sir. Was Demetrius Haley using empty hands control to get Mr. Nichols out of the car? Yes. Drive him out of the car? Yes, sir. Did you know got there, did you know how many occupants were in the car?
No, sir.
Did you ultimately learn that the driver of that car was Tyre Nichols?
Yes, sir.
To your knowledge, did either Martin or Haley know who the driver of that car was at that time of the stop on Ross and Rains?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
What happened when Haley got the driver out of the car?
He tried to get handcuffs on him behind his back. At that time, he was struggling with us. And
who was he?
Mr. Nichols.
Where was Haley initially trying to get the cuffs on?
He was pushing Mr. Nichols against the A-pillar between the door of the car and the car itself, trying to turn him around so he can get his hands behind his back.
And what did the driver choose to do at that time?
He refused to put his hands behind his back and managed to turn around and be facing toward Haley.
And how close were you at that time?
Maybe a foot, maybe 2 feet.
And how close was Martin at that time?
I don't recall.
All right, so Haley's attorney outlining the difficulty of the initial interaction with Nichols. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala. We're going to go back to Memphis, Tennessee now. For the beating of Tyre Nichols' murder trial, 3 former Memphis police officers are now in state court for their second trial in the beating death of Tyre Nichols. The trio have already been convicted on federal charges. Now, in January of 2023, the beating of Nichols was caught on police surveillance video and led to national protests. I want to go back inside the courtroom now. We're hearing from a former police officer. His name is Preston Hemphill. He was involved in that initial stop, and he's testifying about what happened when the Scorpion team started chasing Nichols on foot.
What, during that time when the driver spun around in the A-frame, what did you hear Martin say?
I heard Martin scream, "Let go of my gun."
What did that statement by a fellow officer mean to you?
That someone's probably fixing to get hurt.
Explain why.
Because if you bring a gun into this, it can go deadly.
Our officers trained in gun safety.
Yes, sir.
Is it a serious matter to keep control of your service weapons at all times?
Yes, sir.
Is it potential? Are you taught that it's a very serious situation if you lose control of your service weapon?
Yes, sir.
How did Martin's announcement change the risk at Ross and Rains at that time?
It increased the risk.
How much?
As high as it can go with me.
Okay. And what happened next?
At that time, I heard someone say, "Take him to the ground."
Do you recall who said that?
I believe it was Haley.
And?
We took Mr. Nichols to the ground. He was still resisting with us. I ended up pulling my taser out. I switched it on, but never had any electricity running through it. I put it against his thigh and told him I was fixing to tase him. At that point, we had him under control for a split second. I went to go attempt to put my taser up. It broke free, and that's when Haley pepper sprayed him.
And what happened with the pepper spray?
It sprayed everybody.
Who was everybody?
Haley sprayed himself, Martin, myself, and Mr. Nichols.
Okay. And you said Mr. Nichols broke free.
Yes, sir.
What do you mean by broke free?
He managed to stand up. At that point, I went to go bear hug him to hold him at the scene. He broke free from me, and at that time I saw him running toward a squad car that was still running with the door open. And that's when I fired my taser.
made a good connection with the driver?
No, it did not make a good connection.
Did you know it at the time?
At that time, no, sir.
What happened next?
After he fled from us, myself and Haley tried to chase after him. During that, I also didn't have my glasses. Haley was succumbing to the pepper spray. I was feeling the pepper spray then. At that time, we quit the chase. I put it out on the radio, the description, and what direction the suspect ran. And I helped Haley back to his car.
Why didn't she have your glasses?
During the scuffle on the ground, it fell off.
And glasses pretty important to your vision.
Yes, sir.
How far did you run after the suspect?
Get my lights up, y'all. I hate to do that.
Probably about a block and a half. He was ahead of me.
Pretty obvious, but neither one of you caught him, correct?
Correct.
And that's the point when you stop that you contacted dispatch on your radio, correct?
Yes, sir.
You said you put it out on the radio.
Yes, sir.
What exactly did you put out?
I put out on the radio that the taser was deployed, pepper spray was used, suspect was last seen running southbound on Ross, and the clothing description.
General description.
Yes, sir.
And that he had fled from the stop.
Yes, sir.
And you mentioned that you had helped Haley.
Yes, sir.
Describe that for the jury.
So, after we weren't chasing anymore and I put out the description, Haley was walking back toward me. He said that he couldn't see because of the pepper spray, and I had to escort her back to his car so that he could get his water bottle to attempt to flush out his eyes.
Tell the jury about the flushing out of the eyes.
So, with pepper spray, you just really try to get as most out of your eyes as you can, but even water doesn't really stop the pain. It just temporarily stops it.
Haven money.
Pepper spray that Scorpion officers carry is very strong, correct?
Yes, sir.
Stronger than you can buy at the Scorpion store, correct?
I don't know.
Okay. It's issued to you as part of your equipment, correct?
Yes, sir. It's issued to all DPD officers.
All DPD officers. And if it's used, you have to weigh the canister about how much it's used, correct?
Yes, sir.
And how long were you, am I correct that you spent some time dumping water on Haley's face and eyes at his request?
Yes, sir.
He was literally trying to pry them open, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, we'll stop it there for a quick break, but when we return, we're going to see some of the police body cam leading up to the beating of Nichols. Keep it here on your front row seat to justice. We're watching day 3 of testimony in the beating of Tyre Nichols' murder trial in Tennessee. Demetrius Haley's defense attorney is showing clips of the police body cam footage capturing the traffic stop back in January of 2023.
Nichols' car. Who is that?
That is Officer Martin.
Do we see Haley in this clip yet?
Yes, sir. Right there on the far left of the car on the left side, by the tail light.
Okay. Y'all really don't understand what's happening on this, okay? So I get paused at 20:24:46. Ready? Do you recognize that voice that said you heard what it said?
Yes, sir.
Whose voice is that?
Officer Haley.
Is that called verbal judo?
Yes, sir.
That I didn't do anything.
Voice saying, I'm not doing anything, something like that. Whose voice was that?
Mr. Nichols.
And whose voice is that saying, I? Whose voice is that?
I believe that's Mr. Nichols also.
Let's get this one down. And that was at 20:25:01. 20:25:01, using wristwatch time is 8:25. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
At 20:25:06, someone said, don't do that. Whose voice is that?
Mr. Nichols.
And whose voice was that that said, get on the fucking ground?
That's my voice.
Is that verbal judo?
Yes, sir.
Are you ashamed of that kind of language?
Yes, sir.
Whose voice is that says, I'm going to tase your ass?
It's my voice.
We heard a voice saying tasing. Whose voice was that?
Mark.
At this time of this arrest, was this a lawful traffic stop?
Yes, sir.
The mission of the Scorpion team, as directed by the Memphis Police Department, was to make traffic stops on infractions which may be minor in order to come into contact with those people that may be taking part in illegal things. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You're not the one that made that
Profile.
call, is that right?
Yes, sir, I did not.
Targeting innocent people.
By the way, I stopped it at 20:25:14. Now, that is a picture of what, sir?
Mr. Nichols.
I stopped it at 20:25:22. It appears Mr. Nichols is looking up at you, is that right?
Yes, sir.
What's he saying to you?
That he's on the ground.
His left arm is held by someone's arm, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Whose arm is that?
At this time, I don't know.
Who just said what we just heard?
Officer Haley.
Oh, you want attention? I stopped it at 20:25:28. Starting up again. Whose voice is that at 20:25:37?
Officer Haley.
And then what about the statement, y'all are really doing a lot? Whose voice is that?
Mr. Nichols.
Was Mr. Nichols complying with the directions of these three officers?
No, sir.
Starting up again. Whose voice stopped at 20:25:44? Whose voice was that about getting on his stomach?
That was my voice.
Did he get on his stomach?
No, sir.
Did he ever get on his stomach?
No, sir.
At 20:25:47, someone said spraying. Who was that?
I believe it was Mark.
I'm going to stop right here at 20:25:54. You've given a number of statements to the FBI, the Memphis Police Department, and also to the District Attorney's Office that indicated that Mr. Nichols was able to lift and push you, Haley, and Martin off of himself.
Yes, sir.
Those are true statements or not?
He was fighting for his life. He didn't know what was going on.
About 275.
This is
And how much
crazy.
does, in your approximation, Mr. Martin weigh?
Probably about 250, 270.
And Mr. Haley?
About 250, 270.
You sure you're not just making that up, exaggerated?
Well, hell, put him on the scale if you want to know if it's
Yes, sir.
accurate.
Starting again at 20:25:54. Was that an attempt to fire a taser?
That was, yes, sir.
And then we saw Mr. Nichols do something. What was Mr. Nichols doing?
Taking off his jacket.
That was at 20:25:59. Just before you, at 26:19 or 8:26 p.m., I see a figure appears to be walking back towards you. Who is that?
It's Officer Haley.
Haley got ahead of you, is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so Officer Haley's up front, chase is on. I want to bring back in our guest with us, Los Angeles-based criminal defense attorney, Silva Megerdician. Now, Silva, I'm thinking as I'm watching this testimony, what a great witness this is for the defense. Because what he's doing is, if you're a defense attorney here, you don't want any of your guys to take the stand. There's three different defense attorneys, but none of them want their guys to take the stand. This guy is basically testifying for them. He's explaining how risky the stop was. He's explaining I tried to hit him with my taser. Didn't work. We pepper sprayed him. Didn't work. He pushed us off. I weigh 275 pounds. It sets the stage for the escalation. He's been a great witness, really, for the defense.
It is. And Michael, it shows you the stress, agitation, and anxiety of the officers, but it also shows the fear and the innate, literally the fear of the young man, of Tyre trying to run away because he realizes also he could lose his life. Remember, his mom's house was about I think it was about 2 minutes away from the scene. Now, it's true. I always advise my clients, comply. Complying prevents escalations like this. But what he's doing really well right now is talking about, look, I was frustrated. We were trying just to get him to comply. And really, what the thought process was of all of the officers. The argument becomes, though, what is enough? And this is the first part before the biggest takedown beating that's about to occur that essentially kills this young man. But Hemphill is a great witness. I mean, he is calm. He comes off incredibly credible. There's even fear in his voice. It's a slight little insecurity when he's talking about, it's almost like he's transported back in the situation. So it does do a great job showing the frustration of the officers. The issue, though, is officers are also trained not to have this group think gang mentality that sets fire to each other. And I think also the quotations that the body cam captures is damning as well. It's not just have him comply, it's beat his A. It's just the language also shows you how doing their job escalates into we want revenge. And that, I think, is what the jury's really going to analyze.
Yeah, we heard testimony yesterday from one of the other officers involved in this who has done a plea deal about a run tax.
Power struggle.
And anybody who's from the streets, if you deal with criminals, they all know. When you run from police, when they get you, you know they're going to apply what they call a run tax. You're going to get a beating, right? But what this is doing, and we've seen a blueprint for this type of thing when we talk about the Rodney King case. What did they do? We saw that beating. You see it, you say, okay, it's absolutely excessive force. But what they did was they slowed it all down. They said, at this point, he's not complying. This is why we did this. At this point, he's not complying. This is why he did this. I would imagine they're going to do pretty much the same thing. Here we are. We're trying to get him to get his arms behind his back. He's not complying. Here we are trying to do this. He's not complying. This is why the beating continued. Do you think that's something that might work under these circumstances?
Look, Michael, that's the defense. You know, it really comes to the type of jurors that you have and whether they can understand this kind of groupthink. I just think the video of the actual beating, the striking, the violent nature of the striking, it goes far away from getting the defendant to comply into getting a beatdown revenge. When the beatdown is so excessive, they forget what the purpose is to stopping him in the first place, which is compliance, handcuffing him and getting him into the car. You don't want a comatose client, right? You want someone that you can arrest, have an ethical legal arrest, you put him in the back, and it's finished. This goes to a level where the jury has to decide, was this level reasonable conduct? And I just don't see it.
Yeah, it's hard to escape the brutality of the beating at the end of the day. But we'll continue to watch it and follow this case. So thank you so much for joining me tonight on the show. Always a pleasure. Kisses to you as well.
Yeah, okay, so before I go now a step further, I need at least 6 likes. I absolutely shouldn't have to go through this. Well over, it has at some point been over 500 and some people here. It don't make no sense. And the verdict is still out. I mean, the jury's still out. Oh my God. Uh-oh. Hold on. Hold on. Oh. I thought the verdict was coming. Y'all need to come on. Get the likes up. Bye. Y'all who leaving, bye. I always say the best for love. Oh, okay. Hold on. Y'all gonna play? Y'all gonna play like that? Give my likes up. That's Emmett Martin. That's the one who initiated it, did the lying, created all the chaos for the ones who wasn't here in the beginning. And I need 4 more likes.
Representing the federal.
Hit the like button.
One of the former Memphis police officers charged in the beating of Tyre Nichols and his death walked into a federal courtroom today in handcuffs.
That man, Emmett Martin III. Action News 5's Amani Williams was in the courtroom. She joins us live now in studio with more. Amani.
Like you said, it was Emmett Martin III. Many in the courtroom looked shocked to see him walk in handcuffed and escorted by U.S. Marshals. Now, he is one of the 2 former MPD officers who pleaded guilty to those federal charges. So he has been out on bond during this entire process. Now, according to attorneys representing the federal government in this federal case, the mother of Martin's child called pretrial services and told them Martin was harassing them. Now, a warrant was put out for his arrest, and pretrial services suggested no bond for Martin. He turned himself in earlier today, which is why he walked into the courtroom in regular clothes but handcuffed. At the end of today's hearing on a separate matter, the government asked the judge, Mark Norris, to restore Martin's bond and that he remain free on bond. Now, Judge Norris granted that request. Martin will be back in court on Friday for a hearing to discuss his bond conditions. Now, he was not the only one who walked into the courtroom today in cuffs for this pre-sentencing hearing. Demetrius Haley continues to be behind bars ahead of sentencing in this federal case against the 5 former MPD officers charged in the beating death of Tyre Nichols. Justin Smith, Tadarius Bean, and Desmond Mills were also in court today, along with Nichols' mother and his sister. I'll have more tonight at 10 with what happened during this pre-sentencing hearing.
Checking to see if they have a verdict before I go on. Y'all funny to me. Ooh. Y'all are so entitled. Don't want to hit the like button, but want all the good info. Yeah, go ahead and leave. Go ahead and leave if you can't hit the like button. So we're not gonna hit the like button. We're not gonna support the platform. You're just gonna take all the AunTeaFee has to give and give nothing in return. Is that what you're telling me you're gonna do? Is that what we're doing? You're just a receiver. You one of them. You one of them.